Hello everyone. Um, Welcome to today's class on getting into data analysis. My name is Adebayo Solomon. I know that this has probably been we've had a number of sessions previously before now, and so this is the last day of the class. We're mostly going to focus on typical days like how a few bits and pieces around there. I'm hoping that we can do a bit of practical, because if we're saying, a typical day in my life, I should be able to show, some of the technical things that I actually get into as a data analyst on a daily basis, right? So I think that that would be a good way to go. Right. Uh, 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 I've my hand in, different parts of the data ecosystem, and I'm happy to take us through this session. Right. Again, can we confirm that we can see the slide, please?
I can set a slide, sir.
You can, or you did you say you can?
I
Essentially,
can.
oh, thank you very much. Sorry, I didn't hear what you said the last time. For today's session, we're going to be looking at, introduction to data analysis tools, data analyst CV templates, interviewing as a data analyst, and a day in my life as a data analyst, right? Again, I know that we've had sessions where we've been introduced to data analysis. We've probably had sessions where, we did a bit of practical as well. I'm not sure if we've had a session where we looked at, what a CV template should look like. And then I doubt that we've also had sessions where we talked about, interviewing as a data analyst. And I'll try as much as possible to top it up with a session on what actually happens on a day-to-day basis. I might be wrong to assume, but I think that majority of us on the call are most likely people who are looking to transition into data. And so this session would not go into all of the complexities of being a data analyst in terms of, writing Python scripts and all of that, or writing complex SQL queries. It's just a session to say that, look, you're done with the training now. This is how to go moving forward. Right. So let's move on then. So introduction to data analysis. I mean, as somebody who has been in the field for a few years, um, one thing that best explains what I have been doing as a data analyst over the course of my career would be answering questions, right? A lot of times I get questions from my manager, from, different teams, from uh people within my team, people from out other teams as well, and it's mostly about just asking me questions. How are we doing this month so far? What was the number last month? I used to work back in Nigeria. I used to work with a company, with Philip Morris, and I was digital deployment data analyst. And so my role was more like at the center of the decision making for everything that has to do with digital deployment or customers who were ordering via a digital platform, right? So it was really, really data intensive, right? And so if I'm to sum up everything that I do as a data analyst by way of definition, it would be, as a data analyst, my priority is to ensure that, I'm able to answer questions, and I'm able to help my team or my company or my manager make the right decision based on available data, right? So data analysis is the process of looking at information, which in this case data, to find patterns and make decisions and then answer questions. So at the end, at the center of everything that have been doing as a data person is essentially about, answering questions. Whether as a data engineer, you're trying to build pipelines for data analysts or BI analysts to be able to analyze data to answer questions, or as a machine learning engineer, you're deploying machine learning models to ensure that, stakeholders can answer questions or customers are able to, interact with our platform better in terms of recommendations, in terms of, general experience, in terms of how we use data to answer or to support our customers who use our platform, right? Also, just to also mention that, one of the things that we'll probably be doing today, hopefully there's enough time for that, is to look at data and explore the data, then visualize that data in Power BI, right? So there are four major stages, for all of our operations as data analysts. I mean, we can decide to break it down into much smaller chunks, but looking at it in terms of the bigger picture as a data analyst, you're focusing on four major things, which the first is getting data. You might be working with data within spreadsheets, say Google Sheets, or you might be working with data coming from like a software as a service platform. You might be working with data coming from a database. So at the end of the day, your goal is to be able to access data to answer questions. So it could be in any form, right? But a lot of times we'd probably focus on working on, structured data. That is data that can be arranged in columns and rows. And so the first is, you need to be able to collect data. The second is you need to be able to clean the data, right? A lot of times data can be very inconsistent, or we might have some errors. People make mistakes. Sometimes we even have, problems within the data pipeline that actually brings the data to you as a data analyst. So there might be some sort of inconsistency in the logic within the data pipeline, or it might be somebody imputing the data somewhere made a mistake, or maybe a customer even entering their name or spelling something have entered like a phone number where they are meant to put like their first name. All right. So there's constantly a need for you to ensure that data is clean, and also analyzing the data, which is essentially this is where you answer questions. This is You're trying to look for patterns, you're trying to find insights, you're trying to look for trends within the data, and this can be done in different ways. It could be or just doing simple calculations like sum, like average, like, divide. This really depends on the kind of question that you're trying to answer, right? And also we talk about, presenting this data. At the end of the day, when it comes to working as a data analyst or working within any any part of the data ecosystem, data presentation is very, very, very essential. Whether you're working as a data engineer, you know that this data is somehow going to be used to answer some sort of questions or going to be used to deploy some sort of model, which would still come up in front of maybe stakeholders, in front of customers, in front of, whoever needs to use the other end of the products that you're working on. Essentially, by product, I mean the data that you're working on, right? So presenting data is something that we do a lot as data analysts, and it can be shared in all forms of ways. Some people can decide to present their data in form of charts. Some people can decide to present their data in form of simple tables. Some people can decide to present their data in just simple text, right? As a data analyst, a few years ago, I used to send a report to like the regional level, and I'm talking people who were managing, say, multiple countries or managing continent. Let's say a regional head of digital deployment who is somewhere in, example, Argentina, managing four different or two continents or five countries, whatever. And this person does not like it when we send reports in form of dashboard, whatever. They don't want to see any of that. They just want to see a simple table that explains all the major KPIs and say two lines or one paragraph that basically explains everything. They're not bothered about the charts or whatever. They just want to see a table that captures all the KPIs and also a a bullet point or two bullet point that explains where we are and how we plan to get to where we want to get to, essentially. So data can really be presented, in different forms, right? Four major tools: Excel, or Google Sheets. A lot of companies use, spreadsheets a lot. I presently work with a company that, they're using spreadsheets heavily, right? And so people really use different types of tools. Some other people use Microsoft Excel, some other people use Power BI or Tableau, some other people use SQL, Python, or R. I'm one of the people that went the R way. I just found it easier to learn at the time. So for me, it was just a decision that I made because I found it easier to learn. Some other people, you find most data analysts you find would probably be using uh can we see a view of the forms data can be shown? Um, I mean, we'll get to that. I can see your question in the chat box. We'll get to that in a bit. So it could be any form. Some other people use, other interesting programming languages, but essentially as a data analyst, these four or these six are the ones. For starters, if you want, you can start with Excel. I started with Excel and then moved on to SQL. At some point, I went back to Power BI and then moved back to SQL. And then from SQL, I moved to R. I tried Python first. It was a bit of a struggle. Moved to R, went back to Python, and then settled for R finally, right? So I've made peace with it. I'm using R and I'm not really bothered about Python. Of course, not like I'm completely terrible at Python. I can still work with it, but when it comes to some level of complexity, I might struggle a little bit. But thank God there is ChatGPT now, so I can always find my way around. Um, right, so let's go on. So, I wanted to also talk about a typical data analyst CV should look like. Again, don't quote me. A lot of times I've seen almost 1 million forms of on the but I think that one format that I have seen more is this format, right? Is it possible to focus on Excel and leave the rest, especially Python? And if you have any questions, just put it in the chat. Answer as many as I can before the end of the session, right? So, we look at um all forms of different formats with respect to how your CV should be presented as a data analyst, right? You find that some of them have you know very interesting fonts, some of them have different colors, some of them you see like a picture somewhere. It has worked for some people, but a lot of times you find that people who often talk about how just their CV has given them multiple interviews, you find that in most of the times they probably have this format. And why is this format very good? It's because it's without distraction. It has um very legible font. You can see it, you can read it easily. You're not struggling to find the person's experience. You're not struggling to find the person's, where the person has worked or how long the person has worked for in the different places where they worked. Or you're not seeing like one big passport photograph somewhere that now makes you squeeze some other things together. Again, it's not cast in stone. If you're a graphic designer, you probably want to design your CV to look like you have, if an interesting um design approach to things. But for you as a data analyst, I think your focus is just to ensure that your people can read your the font very well. There has to be a link to your portfolio, or at the very least your LinkedIn profile, and then relevant experience alone. You see that you have, senior data analyst, you know, reward some, because I understand that not really being worded in a way that it favors them as a data analyst, right? So there's also a way that you can reward some of your previous roles, not to lie, but just to make it reflect that, okay, this role might not have been a data analyst, but it was a data intensive role, right? So you can just have been like, for example, my first role fresh out of uni, I worked as an inventory person, but I was using Excel a lot, right? And so on my CV, I would always leave it there as inventory analyst because my role was not it wasn't particularly a data analyst role, but I was working with the production team and the sales team to understand, oh, how many products have we made today? How many has been shipped? How many of those products have returned? So I was working directly with the supply chain team. I was working directly with the sales team. I was working directly with the engineers who were also producing intensive and you know